good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, for the second time. How's everybody doing today? Have a good lunch?
Yes.
I'm really good myself. Thank you for coming today. How many here are members of the OIDA? How many are not members of the OIDA? We got it. Like all the membership fees. We can take care of you today. If you become a member, membership helps provide for all this kind of stuff. We do a lot of things for the automobile dealers here in Ohio. There's a lot of benefits to being a member. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them for you. It's my pleasure to introduce Adam Crowell. He's with ComplyNet. He's brought a lot of good information to our association and to you today. So hear about it. Thank you for coming out. Let him take the floor.
Well, thank you so much, David. Appreciate that. And thank you, OIDA, for having me speak here today. I helped one of the OIDA many years ago. This was probably back in 2010 that I really started getting involved with working with dealers and how to go down to dealer board hearings. At that time, Jim Mitchell, who was the executive director, he would come and be in front of the dealer board and advocating on behalf of dealers. Wendy picked that up and done all the same things. So there's just such a huge advantage to being a member with the OIDA because they do so much for you as dealers. They're lobbying on your behalf. They're providing this sort of education to you, and they're also connecting you with other dealers and with potential vendors that could also be helping you. So very, very grateful for the association. So my name is Adam Crowell, President and General Counsel at ComplyNet. We are a compliance company that works only in the automotive space. We were founded back in 1994 in Chicago. We are now headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. So we're literally, a matter of minutes from some of you and a couple hours from others. But what we focus on kind of all areas of compliance within the dealership and trying to systematize things so it's much more simple, it's easy to follow. Things like training, policies, and procedures, and assessments, and things that go into a platform so you can actually monitor and keep track of everything that's up. So I'm going to be talking about the FTC Safeguards Rule. And this is a rule that's been around for a long time. However, it has been revised, and the new revisions went into effect back in June of this year. So just by a show of hands, how many people here are very familiar with this rule? Okay, so there's a handful of you that are. How many of you are kind of familiar with this rule? Okay, all right. And how many of you are kind of hearing about this rule for the very first time? Okay. So there's all sorts of different people that are here. I'm going to do my best to try to not speak at legalese. And I'm going to try my best to try to explain it in a way that I think makes sense to you as dealers and how we can actually implement some of the stuff and to do it in a way that's very, very efficient. So just as we get started, I'm a licensed practicing attorney here in the state of Ohio, but I'm not necessarily your attorney, so here's my legal disclaimer. Go figure an attorney disclaimer, but I'm just going to put one up there. So, all right, so here's the rule that we're talking about. So back in October 2021, the FTC announced that they were going to have a new FTC Safeguards Rule. When I say a new FTC Safeguards Rule, they were enhancing it. And the reason why they said that they were enhancing it was because there were data breach after data breach after data breach. Okay. Now, the Federal Trade Commission, for this particular rule, it applies to financial institutions, and it is for the protection of customer information that financial institutions obtain. You might be wondering to yourself, well, I'm a dealership, I'm not a financial institution. Well, sorry to tell you this, but you actually are considered to be a financial institution, unless you're completely doing everything in cash deals, which I'm sure none of you are. If you are just helping consumers obtain financing, you're considered to be a financial institution. If you're doing buy here, pay here, of course, you're a financial institution. And not only are you regulated by the FTC, but you're also regulated by the CFPB on top. But the FTC announced this new rule to help enhance security for financial institutions. Many banks did not complain about this new rule. And the reason why is because they're regulated by the FDIC, and the FDIC many years ago, they already required a lot of these things be put in place. Okay? So, the NADA, the NIADA, others had strongly lobbied before the FTC announced that they were passing this rule to not pass this rule, not because they didn't think that it was important to protect customer information. It's just there are some very, very stringent requirements here, and they are requirements that are unfortunately going to cause you to have to come out of your wallet to pay, especially with some of the IT technical services that are involved with this. So I'm going to try to break this down the best that I can for you and tell you a little bit about the facts. So the original FTC Safeguards Rule went into effect in 2003, but because of those data breaches that kept happening, and the FTC, when they would go after a business that suffered a data breach, they kept pulling into the enforcement agreements that they had, the settlement agreements. They would say, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. I am convinced that the FTC got tired of having to put this in their enforcement agreements every single time. And they said, we're just going to build this into the rule and make it so there's no question about it. So they announced this in October 2021 that it finally passed. They had proposed the rule a few years before that. And the enforcement date for the new provisions went into effect on June the 9th. They were originally supposed to go into effect on December the 9th of 2022, but there was a 6-month extension that was granted. Okay, so they said, we'll give you a little bit more time to get in compliance with some of these new regulations. But understand that a violation of this FTC Safeguards Rule can be considered to be a violation of Section 5 of the FTC Act, which carries up to $50,120 per violation. So when you think about all the customer records that you have, and the fact that they could hit you with a violation of $50,000, that could potentially be per customer record. So you can start to think this is where they can potentially put you out of business if you suffer some sort of data breach and you're going afoul of this new regulation. So there's really kind of 10 major steps that you need to focus on when it comes to compliance. And I'm going to bring this up on the screen, and I'm going to talk about each one of these steps, okay? And I can send you a lot more detailed information for any of you that actually want to see the regulation. I can send you a screen on this, but I'll tell you, it starts with putting a team in place to make sure that the information is being safeguarded, and it ends with the report. It's essentially going to the board of directors, the partners, or the owners of the business, okay? And the reason why the FTC did this, they want accountability. At the NIADA convention this past year, there was an attorney from the FTC that was asked the question, because you have this report, does that potentially make us liable as an owner of a business or board member of the business? And the answer from the FTC attorney was like, well, let's kind of talk about that a little bit. The moderator said, I'm going to separate it real quick and just tell you. And by the way, he was an attorney too. He said, absolutely, there's 100% liability that's on you as the business owner, because these reports are being generated for you, and it's your responsibility to make sure that you're in compliance with these regulations. And if you've been paying attention to some of the FTC enforcement actions, even some of the Attorney General enforcement actions that have been happening across the country against dealers, not only are they taking action against the business, but in many cases, they're also attaching personal liability to managers and to officers of the business too. So you've been seeing that happen. So you need to establish what we call a safe first. The rule talks about designating someone to be a qualified individual. Okay? The just say that the qualified individual needs to implement, oversee, and enforce your information security program. So you need to have an information security program. This person does not need to have any particular qualifications. They don't need to have any particular level of experience. They just need to be savvy enough to work with your IT people to make sure that this stuff is being implemented. And you're going to want to have somebody, and maybe it's you, but you're going to want to have somebody that's in charge of this program that's going to be able to hold people accountable, because once again, they have to implement, oversee, and enforce this information security program. The rule also requires that you have qualified information security personnel that are also overseeing the program. And the reason why is because there are technical requirements, things like multi-factor authentication, encryption, continuous monitoring of IT systems, that you're going to need an IT resource to be able to help. I'm not even going to ask all of you to raise your hand on this, but I'm sure if I ask this question, you know, do some of you not have an IT resource? I'm sure that some of you would absolutely raise your hand and say that right now. One of the very important things you need to do is talk to an IT company, a managed service provider company. There's some that are here, there's gentlemen from like CMIT that are here too. They're set up in the expo hall, but they can also help you with parts of this process. So you need to have that team put together. And that team is going to be driving compliance. And you don't get compliant to be able to create a compliant report without any sort of effort. It's going to take some regular meetings with this team to get you into compliance and to maintain compliance. So this is not just something that you do one time that you're done with. This is an ongoing sort of program. And the FTC requires that you have a report that's being generated year over year about what's going on with your information security program. So we'll talk about that annual report a little bit here at the end. There is a requirement now that you also run through a written risk assessment process. The old rule required that you do a risk assessment and that you do these periodically, but now they want to see it in writing. They want to make sure that you're actually doing it. And as part of this risk assessment process, what you need to truly understand is you need to understand where your data is going. So, how are you collecting information? Some of it's going to be on paper, some of it's going to be electronically, of course, through emails, through CRM, EMS, through social media, but you need to understand how you collect this information. Who has access to that information, on what devices, how it's being shared with others, what sort of agreements you have in place to protect that. But you need to go through a written risk assessment process. Next, you need to, based on your written risk assessment and all the information that you have, all the places that it's going, you need to develop what they call a written information security program. Okay, as I mentioned, that qualified individuals in charge of this information security program, but you need to have a written program that is identifying the administrative, physical, and technical safeguards that you're putting in place to protect this information. You are also required to have information security awareness trainings that you're providing to your employees. I would challenge any of you that would say, yeah, there's employees that I have that don't have access to customer information at my facilities. I guarantee that they all do. If the FTC were to come into your dealership and ask you, hey, who's your qualified individual? It's this person. Where's your information security program, risk assessments? Here they are. Show me your training documentation. You have to make sure that you can prove to them that you actually train all of your employees on information security. So when you're talking about that, the trainings should relate to how do we protect our information. Once again, administrative, physical, and technical safeguards that are there. It should also deal with things like how are we properly disposing of information, and very important things like, you know, what do we do to try to recognize things like a phishing attack, right? Because 91% of all hacking is starting with phishing. And One of the next things that I mentioned here is phishing penetration testing, okay, or simulated phishing attacks. The rule itself talks about testing your key information systems and your email systems with one of your key information systems, okay? So putting your employees through that sort of testing to make sure that they're not falling prey to a phishing attack is going to be very important as part of this process. And it's also a great way to test whether or not the training that you provided to them for information security awareness, whether or not it actually stuck. The rule is also requiring now that you not only go through an assessment process for yourself, but all the vendors that you work with, the service providers that have access to customer information, that you're also assessing them. You're only selecting the service providers that are capable of maintaining the appropriate safeguards, and that you're contractually obligating each and every single one of them to protect the information. So you may call it a data protection agreement, you may call it a safeguards agreement. You might have it in your master agreement already with some of your vendors. You need to look for some language that's talking about either safeguarding information or the Brand-New Wiley Act, but you should be looking for that type of information in your master agreements. If you don't have one, you can also have an addendum that you send out to them. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, but there's a number of ways to skin the cat. There's the need for understanding access controls and making sure that only certain people have access to the information. Sometimes what I find is that dealerships are giving a lot of access to employees to different programs and information that they may not in fact need. But even more importantly, they're not documenting what sort of access has been granted to these employees. Okay? And so I've seen different cases where someone has left the dealership. A year later, it's discovered that that person who left the dealership went on to another dealership and had been accessing things like their CRM or their DMS over the period of the course of the year, right? And the reason why they were doing it was for competitive reasons, but technically, when you have that situation that occurs, you now have a data resource situation, because now you have someone that's not supposed to have access to the information, but now has access to it. So part of the access controls are trying to make sure that people only have access to what they need, cutting off access when they no longer need it, but then also putting different procedures in place to make sure that you're able to track what sort of access there is. And with your vendors, asking them things like, you know, what sort of audit process do you have like built in here, that quality audit trail? Or if people are checking in and out information, even physical information, do you have like some sort of log? Kind of very similar to, you know, checking something out of the library. Is there a log to really kind of track what sort of information you have? So it's both physical and it's electronic. From a technical standpoint, and by the way, this rule doesn't have a particular framework that it follows from different information security personnel and organizations. But what it does, in fact, require is that for any of your systems that have customer information, that each one of those systems be encrypted. Okay? So that's why part of this process of assessing your vendors and asking them questions, one of those questions should be, is this an encrypted system? How strong is the encryption? There's also the requirement that these systems also have put in place multi-factor authentication. Okay, so I know this can be a pain for many people because you're spending extra time trying to log into the system and that system, but multi-factor authentication is just crucially important. As I mentioned before, 91% of all data breaches are starting with phishing. Well, guess what? Once you get someone's credentials potentially, the only way that you're going to be able to get into that system is if there's no like multi-factor authentication. So the other statistic that I've also heard is that about 90% of those successful data breaches are where there's no encryption and there's no multi-factor authentication that's happening. So those are just very, very important that you put those in place. Another new element to this is that for these information systems, they're also requiring, it's kind of an option. You can either have what they call continuous monitoring, Or, absent effective continuous monitoring, you can have penetration testing of these information systems, and which have to happen at least once a year. Or vulnerability scanning is also happening every 6 months. Okay, so let me try to break that down, and I'll restate that just to clarify this a little bit more. Think of your networks as kind of like a piece of property, right? Like I see a door, I see a window, I see potential ways that I can get into that system. Okay, that's kind of what a vulnerability scan is. It's trying to look for those and then trying to shore up those issues to make sure that people can get into it. A penetration test is actually trying to break in. Can I get through that door? Can I get through that window? If I get inside, how far can I get? And can I get out with the information? That's a penetration test. Continuous monitoring is more like having someone that's watching things 24/7. It might be a combination with software, but they might be getting flagged and alerted and saying, hey, we have a situation that's going on, and give them the opportunity to kind of shut things down. It's kind of like having that 24/7 security on your premises. Okay, so when you think about things like vulnerability scanning, there's a lot of tools out there that you can run vulnerability scanning with. But with that said, you have to do that in combination with penetration testing if you're not going to do the continuous monitoring. The penetration testing tends to be a very expensive process. And the reason why it's expensive is because you have highly skilled people that are trying to break into your system. And they might be using software in combination with it. They also might be doing things like just trying to call people or send emails to people and see if people would fall prey to giving away information and see if they can get into your system. So these are typically IT personnel that have gone through certification processes, and so penetration testing tends to be more on the expensive side. The continuous monitoring, it used to be that it was much more expensive. It's become much more productized now. So there's a lot of solutions out there for the continuous monitoring. My preference is to put continuous monitoring in place because that's probably the thing that seems to protect you the most. And doing that in combination with things like vulnerability scanning on top of it. But like the true penetration testing, it would include both external penetration testing where people are trying to work in from the outside, but also kind of internal penetration testing of the networks and the system. So it's very important also as part of that assessment process that you're making sure when you're asking those questions of the various service providers, you're trying to also make sure that they also have these types of things in place as part of that. There is a need now for a written incident response plan. That is definitely a new part of the rule. And the purpose of this incident response plan is to make sure that you have a process in place for trying to detect whether or not there's been some sort of security event or violation, some sort of data breach that was to happen, but also to help you quickly respond, recover, remediate, revise your information security program to make sure that these types of things don't happen in the future. And then in some cases, there may be a need to do certification. So if there is a situation where you have some sort of event that happens, this is where you're going to want to pick up the phone and call either your attorney and or your insurance company to let them know that something like this is happening, which could certainly be a very scary situation. One thing I want to mention about that is that if you do not have cyber insurance coverage right now, you're in a big time risk. You need to make sure that you get cyber insurance coverage in place. Cyber insurance is only getting more expensive, of course, because there's more and more data breaches that have happened. I think back in 2020, I heard some statistics that there's only really about 10 companies that do reinsurance of the actual insurance companies when it comes to cyber. And there was the collection of about $7 billion in premiums during that year. But the problem is they paid out about $20 million. Okay. So because of that, the price of cyber insurance has gone way up. But also the the insurance companies are also now having additional requirements. And most of the stuff that I just told you about, that's also what the insurance companies will require. And when you go to fill out that application and say, yes, we have this, yes, we have that, you better be accurate about it, because if you're not, and later there's a data breach that happens, there's a great chance that they're going to deny your claim and say, no, you said that you had this, and you didn't, you basically lied to us. Here, we'll give you your premium back, but the rest is on you. And there's been plenty of actions that have been filed by insurance companies against insurers, basically saying, hey, judge, you know, this is what happened, and please declare that we don't have any coverage in this case because they weren't truthful with us. So that's going to be an important part of it. All right, so this written annual report. So you will have to produce on an annual basis, and this really comes from the qualified individual. Once again, the qualified individual is going to give it to the board of directors. And if you're not a corporation, you don't have a board of directors, the rule says that you have to give it to an equivalent governing body, and if there's no equivalent governing body, it's going to be basically the person that is the highest ranking official at that location of that business, right? So you as owners and others, you're going to be getting a copy of this report. And the purpose of this report is to identify how compliant you are with this rule, and also to identify all sort of material things that have happened, things like, you know, what sort of risks have we assessed, what sort of safeguards have we put in place, have there been any security events and violations, how well are we doing with our vendors, trainings, you know, monitoring, all of that stuff that goes with that, and are there any things that we need to do to improve this program? Maybe the qualified individual is asking for additional funds or additional solutions, and they're asking for that approval, and of course, that will put you in a position where you're going to have to say, I see where we're going to need this, we can reach out to the IT, put these types of things in place, okay? So that's kind of a breakdown, that's a high level breakdown of what the rule itself is requiring. There's a lot of considerations here, okay? Because it doesn't even talk about like having like backups, and just other great security practices like that. But the purpose of this rule is, once again, to protect consumers. The FTC does not care that it's going to cost you additional money, that it's going to change the way that you do business. And you need to start thinking about things like, you know, my employees, am I allowing my employees to use personal cell phones at work? What about emails, right? Are they company owned emails? Because think about it, I mean, there's so much information, especially on a personal email, and if they're using it for work and they leave, how are you ever going to pull that information back? So one thing that you should definitely do is get in charge of that email. And you're also going to have to think about, you know, things like how do you interact with a potential customer. Everyone wants to do text messaging, right? Unfortunately, most SMS messages are not necessarily secure. There's no, the SMS technology goes back to the 70s, and it's not a secure way of communicating. Now, potentially secure, it's an iPhone to an iPhone, or it's potentially secure, it's an Android to an Android, but there's just no guarantee because you don't know what sort of devices people are going to have when it comes to that. So something that I've seen happen more and more often at dealerships, we start to see where they're starting to put even something on the website where someone can securely upload documents to the dealership. So some sort of file share request. If you have like Office 365, okay, you probably have OneDrive, and you can basically go through the share file request on that and actually embed that on your website. You can work with the IT provider to do it. It's actually a pretty simple process to be able to do it. But then you have to make sure that only certain people have access to that folder, and then, you know, if someone gets terminated, of course, you're going to take that out there. But the real reason why you want that is you don't want someone texting things like a social security card or a driver's license or anything along those lines. You don't want that being sent through text. You want that to be sent to you securely. And if you need to put it into your DMS for one reason, or maybe you need to provide the information to the lender through a secure portal, you'll be able to do that. So, one question that I get quite often about this is, wow, there's a lot of stuff here. How do we fast track this, right? How do I get up to as high a compliance as I possibly can in the shortest amount of time if I can just focus on this? And by the way, based on everything that I went through here, can we all agree that there's probably a lot of stuff that everyone has to do? By the way, are there any questions so far? I mean, I know I threw a ton of information out at you in a very short amount of time, but I wanted to summarize it the best I could.
What information basically are we protecting? Like names and addresses used to be in phone books.
Sure.
So are we concerned about names and addresses and phone numbers? Are we just concerned about social security numbers and credit card numbers?
Yeah. Great question. So the FTC in the commentary basically said that the sheer fact that they may be your customer might be something that they don't want them to the outside world. Okay? So basically any information that you have about a customer that was applying potentially to get financing or looking to do a financing transaction will apply. Now, of course, all of your systems, your DMS, CM, CRM, whatever it is, whether you're doing service or just sales, or if you're selling someone a vehicle for cash, I mean, all the information is available, right? So really what you have to do is just focus on protecting all of the information. Yep.
Okay, we've been in business for 32 years. Folders of customer information from 20 years ago. Can we take that and just burn all the files?
Well, according to Ohio's open burning laws, I'm saying
We're in the country, we can throw it in, that's not, can we just don't have them?
But with that said, so when it comes to the retention of some of this documentation, especially paper documentation, you do need to have, as part of the access controls, you need to put in some sort of data document retention schedule. The rule itself talks about when you no longer have use for that information, you need to destroy it in a way that's not going to be constructed within like a 2-year period. Okay. So record retention is not it's a little bit of an art for sure. Because you have like the BMV, for example, that will say, hey, you need to keep these records for 5 years or 3 years, depending on whether or not it's physical or electronic, right? But you also have your accounting firms that might say, hey, I want you to keep this deal jacket for 7 years. And the reason why I want you to keep it for 7 years is because the IRS can basically come back and audit your business for up to 6 years. So they want you to keep it for a longer period of time. There's also the ability for a plaintiff's attorney to say that you're going to block your behavior, you're keeping that paper. They'll say that you have like a 3-year term. Potentially there could be a breach of contract action that's brought up at a later time. So what I typically see when it comes to things like deal jackets and service ROs and that sort of thing, it's usually somewhere between a 7 and 10 year retention period based upon what your accountant and your attorney are telling. When it comes to like things like your debt credit applications, that's something that you're only going to want to keep for a period of 5 years. There's 2 regulations that relate to credit applications. One is the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the other one is the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. One of those requires a 25-month retention period for this sort of documentation. However, a consumer can potentially come back and sue you up to 5 years after the fact and say, hey, you were somehow discriminated against with the credit application, and you're going to have items and documentation to support the pay gap in an appropriate fashion, right? So I typically tell people to keep that for a 5-year period of time, and after that, destroy it. There's plenty of companies that you can hire to come and pick up documents and destroy those. It's not necessarily cheap to do it. I'm sure you probably looked into it already, but you want to make sure that they're going to be able to destroy it in such a way you know that it's not going to be read some other time. And they'll typically, you know, take that documentation and they'll take pictures of it and they'll give you things like certificates of destruction to be able to prove that you actually destroyed it. But you probably have a ton of information that you can just get rid of. Does anyone here think that they have less than 5,000 consumer records total? Anybody? Good. I didn't think that anyone would say that. The reason why I was asking is because there are a couple of new requirements that you don't have to follow. If you have less than that, I've only seen maybe one dealer that has less than 5,000 consumer records, and that person was in business for a very short amount of time and selling very few covers. So just about all of you will have at least 5,000 consumer records, so you need to do all of that stuff. All right, so fast tracking compliance with this rule. It can happen, but you're going to have to take action immediately. And once again, think about this. Think about something happens, the FTC comes in, they start asking you for this documentation. What are you going to be able to show to them? And what's the fastest thing that you do? And so I'm going to suggest that there's certain things that you can do right now, and then there's some things that you can do here in the future. So number one, you should probably look to sign up for some sort of solution. Okay? I'm not suggesting that you come to me and say, hey, Adam, I like what you have to say, but do your homework. Look for a solution. And most solutions are going to be very, very similar in the way that they approach it. But what you're going to get is you're going to get a compliance platform. It's going to be able to help you track all of this stuff. There's going to be a process that they put in place to make sure that you're, you know, connecting all the dots that you need to. And you're going to have people that are behind it that are helping push you and drive you, because after all, you want to sell and service vehicles, you don't want to do this stuff, right? You need someone else to help focus on this with you. So do your research and look for an option. The next thing that you're probably going to have to do with whatever solution you sign up for is get an employee list, okay? And some of you may not have employees, and that's going to make your life a little bit easier, but most of you do have employees. And what you're going to need is you're going to do things like the person's name, the work email, education, department, job title. And the reason why you're going to do this is because you're going to need to provide those people training, and you're also going to want to do things like the simulated phishing attacks with those people to make sure that they're not falling prey. And if they are, you can provide some remedial trainings to them and help them understand. But it's a way better situation if you find that they're going to fall prey for a phishing attack than if an actual hacker gets their hands on that person. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to put that person in charge of the program, your qualified individual. That qualified individual is going to be responsible ultimately for answering the initial risk assessment. Of course, I highly suggest that they go through the process of also working with the IT and answering the IT questions that also go along with this risk assessment process. And then there should be some sort of initial meeting that is happening. And that initial meeting should be happening with your provider, with the qualified individual, and with that IT resource that you have put in place.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can you, after, I'm trying to take pictures, and I keep taking them before you're done.
If you give me your email address, I'll send you this presentation.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. I should have said that before we ever got started. All right, so you're going to want to have an initial meeting after going through this assessment sort of process. And the reason why you want to do this is you want to review the risk assessment, what the answers to those are, complete any sort of outstanding questions that maybe the person wasn't able to answer, but after speaking with everyone, you can get through that. You're also going to want to review the IT security questionnaire, start thinking about how you're going to implement the items that are missing. Like I said, okay, well, we have this program over here, it doesn't have multi-factor authentication, maybe it's our, DNS or something else. Okay, can we reach out to that vendor and see if they can put that stuff in place? I think what you'll find is that most of your programs will have this stuff in place, and if they don't, they're probably working on it because they're probably getting a lot of pressure from many different dealers on this. But you also need to review and discuss the current policies that you have in place, right? So what sort of policies have you establish at your dealership to tell people what's appropriate when it comes to protecting customer information. And you should be looking for things like, of course, the information security program that we talked about, the incident response plan. But you should also, like I mentioned before, have a data and document retention schedule, policy, clean desk, clean screen, sort of policy, acceptable use policy for things like emails and your other programs that you're using. If you're going to allow someone to bring their own device, what sort of policy do you have on that? Any other policies that are related to this? Maybe you have someone that remotely works every once in a while. What sort of policies are you putting in place to make sure that they're actually getting a secure connection and that they're treating this information securely? The next thing that you should do is obtain a list of all of your service providers that have access to the customer information. And the beauty of some of the systems that are out there, including ours, is that you can actually crowdsource a lot of this stuff. So once an assessment has been sent out to a service provider and answered, now it's available to everybody. So, you can of course go through that process yourself, but it would probably be a good idea to automatically generate the assessments and the data protection agreements. I know that some service providers that are out there are willing to enter into agreements that are basically saying things along the lines for any of our customers where we might have customer information, we agree that we're going to have a minimal or exceed the minimal requirements of the FTC Safeguards Rules, but you can also crowdsource those types of agreements so you can actually have platforms that can send that stuff out.